Alright YouTube, so we're back of course to talk about some Final Fantasy VII Remake, and we are here with the video I've been wanting to do for actually quite a while, where I wanted to talk about and discuss the changes in Remake that I actually didn't particularly enjoy. Now, a couple things before we get into it. For one, these aren't things that necessarily even affect my thoughts on the game. They're not really that big of a deal in most cases. Secondly, the changes that we're going to talk about aren't anything to the story, so we're not talking about whispers or whatever happens at the end of Remake. None of that is a part of this video. Because at least when it comes to me as a fan of Final Fantasy VII, I've been playing that game through a majority of my life, and I've played it countless times, and I actually welcome the idea of there being new shit happening. Like, we're getting relatively the same FF7 story, right? Remake was the Midgar segment from OG FF7 with just a bunch of additional shit. So the ending and the whispers, I wasn't the biggest fan of those things, but also at the same time, they didn't necessarily affect my opinion on the game itself, if that makes any sense. So we're just going to hop right into it and probably get the most obvious one out of the way, kind of the biggest complaint for a lot of people when it comes to Remake, and that is the lack of blood. Specifically in this case, we're talking about, of course, the Shinra building and Jenova's escape from the chamber. Of course, when it comes to original Final Fantasy VII, whenever Jenova's freed from her chamber and our group is freed from their prison cells, we stumble across an absolute massacre throughout the Shinra building where there's dead bodies everywhere. There's also a blood trail that goes throughout the Shinra building that you're actually capable of following to your destination. And then, of course, whenever you get into the random encounters within the Shinra building, there's actually blood on the battlefield itself, which all is very, very effective to get across the threat that Jenova is. And then, of course, we jump forward 23 years later. We get to this segment in Remake, and then all we have that is supposed to be an equivalent to this is a purple, goopy trail that Jenova left behind. It's equivalent to Ivanu's dragging his nutsack through the Shinra building. In fact, whenever I think about it, that's a hell of a lot scarier than what we actually got with Remake. And look, we all completely understand why we couldn't have what the original game had. For whatever reason, despite our society kind of progressing and becoming more accepting of a lot of different things, you know, a mature game now is a hell of a lot more mature than what a mature game was back in the day, right? But for some reason, a T rating got worse. Because back in the day, a T rating could have blood and all this other shit that the original FF7 had. But these days, it's like a T rating is almost a kid's game. There's a lot of excessive cursing in Remake, but there's not a whole lot that makes it seem realistic in the world like there should be blood, because there's obviously character deaths in this game. And it's actually made just a little bit worse by the fact that just a year later after Remake came out, we'd get the Yuffie DLC episode Intermission, which would obviously incorporate a little bit of blood. It's nothing excessive, it's nothing like the Shinra building in the OG FF7, but it's still very effective. And then within the same year that Remake dropped, we got the reveal trailer for Final Fantasy XVI, which we now know to be an M-rated game, but we assume that right away because of this trailer, where we see a character get their damn head cut off, and then another character that's either a kid or a teenager at the time is just absolutely covered in this beheaded person's blood. And then weirdly enough, this year we got the trailer for Final Fantasy VII Rebirth. Of course, that's the sequel to Remake, where they actually went out of their way to update Zack Fair's character model to add blood and scratches all over his body that he did not have at the end of Remake, where he just essentially looked dirty. So there's almost like this lack of continuity where sometime between Zack taking Cloud to that cliff and then where they end up in the Rebirth trailer, it just looks like Zack got scratched a bunch. And then when you hop back to Remake after seeing all this, it's just kind of annoying because there's plenty of moments where there could have been blood, like Jesse's air quotes death scene, Big's air quotes death scene, Bear getting stabbed, President Shinra getting stabbed, and probably some other shit that I'm not even thinking of. And when you actually think back to this moment right here, obviously they couldn't do a massive trail of blood like they did in the original game, but they could have at least had like bodies along the way, right? Why couldn't there be like people that Jenova killed along the path? We killed plenty of people in FF7, right? We killed plenty of Shinra soldiers and shit. So why couldn't we just have like people that are just lying on the ground? You don't even have confirmation necessarily that they're dead, but just bodies along the way as we're following the trail. Like that could have at least given us something to remember the original game. But nope, we just got this shit. This next one is kind of like a two-parter. They're two separate things, but they somewhat go together, of course. And it's for one that the flower the Aerith gives you in Remake is forced upon you. Like you can't not get it. Whereas in the original game, of course, you have the option to completely deny the flower. Even if you deny it in Remake, she still just gives it to you.
I'm good.
Oh, don't be like that. I know you want one.
Now, to be perfectly fair, there's not really a reason to not buy it in the original FF7. I don't remember off the top of my head if denying the flower gives you negative affection points for Aerith for the date scene. But even if you're going for a different character for the date scene in FF7, you're almost better off just buying the flower to either up the affection points of Tifa or Barrett. Unless you're specifically, I guess, going for like a Yuffie playthrough, then maybe lower an Aerith's score. If that would do that by denying the flower, then I guess that'd be the reason. But if you're going for the Yuffie playthrough specifically, don't do that. I'm calling the cops. And based on what we just discussed, you should already know what the second part is, but once we get to Sector 7 and get to the 7th Heaven Bar, you have no control on who you give the flower to, right? You're forced to give the flower to Tifa. So it almost makes canon you getting the flower and then you giving the flower to Tifa. Which, again, to be fair, maybe that's what a majority of people would do with the flower as they played throughout the years. But me personally, I think I've given it more times to Marlene than to Tifa. And not even because I'm going for like a best bromance playthrough to go on the date with Barrett or whatever the case. But I just feel like more so in that moment in OGFF7, it just feels better to give it to Marlene because she's a little girl that's like scared of you and it'd obviously make her happy. And if we go on a bit of a side tangent here, if this was like a real world scenario, Tifa seeing Cloud give the flower to Marlene because she's scared would actually probably build more affection for Tifa than if she were to just to receive the flower, because she's seeing like that softer side of Cloud, now he handles a little girl that's kind of afraid of him, right? And the other problem with all the shit that's forced in this section of the game is that you get this kind of awkward moment between Barrett and Cloud. Look, dude, as much as I love Barrett in this game, the moment where he gets like aggressive with Cloud because of Marlene being scared, it just kind of annoys me because Barrett's sitting right there next to Marlene. Right there, whatever Cloud's trying to interact with Marlene. Clearly, Cloud is not trying to scare Marlene. Obviously, Barrett's an overprotective dad. I get that. That doesn't need to be explained to me. But it would have been nicer if, in this moment, just like OGFF7, we could have given the flower to Marlene in order for her not to be that scared of Cloud anymore. And that would almost be building that like friendship between Barrett and Cloud a lot earlier than what Remake actually allows. And look, I get it too. Like Barrett and Cloud are butt heads at the beginning of the game, so Barrett probably just looking for a reason to be aggressive with Cloud. But at the same time, you know, it just feels so forced. You know, I've watched countless like Let's Plays of this game, and almost everybody has the same reaction in this scene. It's like, what the hell? It's a little aggressive. That's a bit much, Barrett. This next one's kind of a quicker one, but it's definitely worth mentioning because for the majority of people, if I'm not mistaken, it's their least favorite segment of Remake, and it's us going back to the goddamn sewers, which is something we did not do in the original FF7, right? We drop down in there, it's a tiny dungeon, we have a boss fight with Apps/Abzu, we kill the goddamn thing, and then we never see these sewers again. It's so bad, in fact, that I didn't even bother to like chapter select and capture gameplay of it because I just did not want to. And we only do it to get some grapple guns, right? Leslie gives us some grapple guns, which makes even less sense considering that our group already had some earlier in the game, so there should be other ways for us to get those, so we shouldn't even have to fucking do this backtracking. It just feels like busy work, right? Just making us go back through a dungeon we already did once. Now, that being said, I do think that Leslie's a pretty cool character, so it's kind of cool to get some more time with him, I suppose, even though the sewer part sucks. And the Abzu fight is pretty fun, maybe a little less fun, a little more annoying the second time. But I did like the Abzu boss fight, but it's just kind of annoying that we just fight him and don't kill him the first time, and then we're forced to do all that shit again. Now, if I'm being perfectly honest, and I'm making this bit a little bit longer than I need to, I do prefer the grapple gun route than what we did in OGFF7, because it's just kind of weird and goofy FF7 back in the day, right? Because we buy batteries. How would the guy in the gun shop even know that we need batteries to get all the way up to the Center building? We use a battery to like spin a propeller, so we create a path for ourselves. It's just weird shit, right? Stuff that might have been just a little bit too weird for Remake, and obviously the grapple guns are just make more logical sense, especially since we've already used them a few times throughout the story. This next one's another smaller one. Again, these aren't meant to be game-breaking changes or whatever the case. But I'll be honest, when we got to the Sector 5 Church segment, Chapter 8, I was actually severely disappointed that we didn't have the barrel minigame. And it's kind of tedious to do the chandelier shit on subsequent playthroughs. It's also made worse just because it's boring. There's only the one chandelier to cut down, so you can't even get it wrong. It might take you a minute to figure out the path if you're not looking where you got to climb and stuff like that. It's just boring, dude. It's just miserable. And it makes less sense than the barrel minigame. I don't know if realistic's the right word, but at least with the barrel minigame, you're up in the rafters, they don't see you, and you can drop barrels on them to try to and prevent them from chasing Aerith and stuff, right? Whereas with the Remake interpretation, the guards just sit there and watch you as you climb to the one chandelier that you can cut down, and they let it kind of fall right near them, and then Aerith runs, and that's the end of it. Also, when it came to the original FF7, bringing up the dating mechanic earlier, there was actually a purpose to the barrel minigame. Depending on how you did it, you could either gain or lose affection with Aerith. It's just kind of similar to the Marlene flower thing I mentioned earlier, where it would have been nice to have the option. If we had the barrel minigame and you could actually do shit out of order where you're not helping Aerith, you're kind of making it worse. There could have been some funny scenes that transpired from that. The dialogue and banter that Cloud and Aerith could have had there would have been great. And lastly for this video, this might be the one that bothers me the most. It's either this or the blood situation that we talked about towards the beginning of the video. And it's sort of a two-parter. It's the lack of a water element pretty much when it comes to Remake outside of enemy attacks that are in the game. And the fact that they put Leviathan in the game, but made it non-elemental. For starters, there are plenty of other summons in the original Final Fantasy VII that could have just taken this spot. A lot of them are optional or missable, so that you could put them in this spot where it's kind of guaranteed. You don't have to get it in Remake either, but it could have just been literally any other summon, or a brand new summon, right? They broke apart Fat Chocobo and Chocomog from OG FF7 and made them two separate summons entirely. Not to mention that besides Leviathan, there's at least two other summons in the game that have no attribute, Fat Chocobo and Bahamut, and then you have the DLC summons that technically don't have an attribute either because of how they work or what they do in combat. But it gets even worse than that, because Leviathan is actually weak to the lightning attribute, lesser resistant to ice, and greater resistant to fire, which would insinuate that it's of the water attribute despite it not really existing in this game. But we dive even further down the rabbit hole here because Remake could have definitely used an electric summon. We could have used Rama. There's plenty of mechanical, robotic bosses in the Remake story, so electric summon would have been perfect for that. And then we get the Yuffie DLC, which has the Rama summon. But say it with me here, for a narrative lore purpose, Leviathan would have made so much more fucking sense for a Yuffie DLC, given that it's attached to her and her village and her people. It's literally like the main reward from Yuffie's optional side quests and shit that you do in her town of Wutai, her village of Wutai. It's literally a part of her people. Not to mention, you get an optional key item later in the game called Leviathan Scales that you take back to her village and go to the cave to be able to get additional loot. As a Final Fantasy VII fan, I just cannot stand this, like, almost oversight, right? Even if they kept Leviathan non-elemental, which I absolutely disagree with, these still should have been swapped. Like, how do you not have Leviathan be a part of the Yuffie DLC? Like, it just bothers me. I just can't stand it. Now, when it came to the original Final Fantasy VII, there wasn't a lot of water attacks for us, the character, to use against enemies, right? There's very few. There's an enemy skill called Aqua Lung, which is one of the best attacks in the entire game. You can get it pretty early, and it decimates for pretty much the entire game. And can you guess what the other one was? Can you take just a wild guess what that other water attack is that's in FF7 Original? I'm not even going to say it. It's ridiculous that I have to say it. And we're also kind of in a no-win situation going forward, right? Because either they're going to go forward with the rest of the trilogy and just never have the water attribute being used for us, which would be really, really annoying, especially because that would then mean that there is going to be no Aqua Lung, and that's one of the most iconic attacks from FF7 Original. Or going forward with like Rebirth in the third game, they're going to introduce the water attribute, which then makes me even more pissed that it didn't already exist in the first game. And you could have a bit of a similar discussion with like the Earth attribute, obviously, because we didn't have that in Remake Part 1, but that's obviously an element that exists in Original, and also there's a summon that's Earth attribute, so does that mean going forward they're not going to introduce Earth because it didn't exist in the first game? Does that mean that if Titan exists in the Remake trilogy, is he going to be non-elemental? There's a lot of problems here. I'm losing my mind. And look, maybe they put Aqua Lung in the future games, but it's non-elemental just like Leviathan, but that would annoy me even further. I think we're going to wrap it up there, my dudes, because I could rant about this for a long time. I actually had more that I recorded, but I just got rid of it, because we're going down too far of a rabbit hole, and the video needs to end at some point. But that's where I'm going to pass up to you guys. So here's the thing. There is absolutely nothing wrong with criticizing a game that you like and or love. In fact, I think it's better that you do, that you accept the flaws that a game has. No game is perfect. FF7 is my favorite game of all time. Has plenty of damn flaws. So when it came to Remake, were there any changes from the original Final Fantasy VII that you didn't like? Or just in general, what are some aspects of Remake that you just personally were not a fan of? That'll be the video, my dudes. Subscribe to the channel if you guys are new. Social networks in the description below. Follow me on Twitter, @DavidYT. That's it. Bye.
Used to care what people thought, but now I care more, and nobody out here's got it figured out. So therefore, I've lost all hope of a happy ending, depending on whether or not it's worth it. So insecure, no one's perfect. We spend it with no shame. We blow that like Coltrane. We in here like Logain, or leave it like Cobain.